In the cold darkness of an ordinary night, two men walk through the streets of a large city. Their shabby clothes and disheveled hair make them go unnoticed, invisible like so many others who sleep on sidewalks or beg for help on street corners. But what no one could imagine was who they really were: Elon Musk and Donald Trump, the most unlikely men for that reality. It wasn't a movie nor a social experiment to gain likes on the internet. It was real. They had left behind the pomp, the fancy cars, and even their names. Why? The answer was hidden in the blank stare of a black woman sitting under an awning, with only a thin blanket to protect her from the freezing wind. Her name was Amara. His story was one that many preferred to ignore: a life marked by violence, the loss of his job, and the tragedy of seeing his home consumed by debt. The world had turned its back on her, and there she was, alone, invisible, like so many others. But there was something in Amara's eyes that made Elon and Trump stop. It wasn't just sadness. It was a silent force, a struggle almost extinct, but still pulsing. They decided to help. However, not the easy way, with a check or an anonymous donation. They wanted to understand. They wanted to feel. That's when everything started to go wrong. The police, called by a businessman bothered by the beggars who were causing discomfort, arrived quickly. The red and blue lights flashed frantically, and the police officers' voices were loud and full of contempt. Elon and Trump, still disguised, tried to argue, but were ignored. To them, they were just two dirty men and a woman who had no reason to be there. And then came the humiliation: sharp words, mocking laughter, and a shove that almost sent Elon to the floor. "Declare, I have faith, if you believe that no one deserves to be treated like this, regardless of their appearance or condition." Amara tried to intervene. "They didn't do anything. Leave me alone," he shouted in a trembling but firm voice. What she received in return was a cruel laugh and a warning to not make a fuss. The police officer's words were like blades, cutting deep. To them, it didn't matter who those people were or why they were there. All that mattered was appearance. Dirty, poor, disposable. It was at that moment that something began to change in Trump's eyes, something few had seen before, a mixture of anger and shame. He was used to being heard, to having power. Now it was just another one on the cold ground. Right, amen, if you believe that no one should suffer humiliation because of their appearance or financial condition. But what really hurt was not the treatment received. It was seeing Amara, who had already faced so much, be reduced to nothing in front of those men. Elon, always practical, tried to argue logically, but his words were ignored. "Shut up, beggar!" shouted one of the police officers, while the other began searching through the few belongings they had. It was like watching a storm destroy what little was left. Elon looked at Trump, and for a moment the two understood each other without words. This couldn't continue. Not like that. But what could they do? Revealing their identities at that moment seemed absurd. They had started this for a reason, to understand the pain and humiliation, but now they were experiencing firsthand what so many people faced every day, and the worst was yet to come. Leave, I trust, if you believe that God has a greater purpose, even in the most difficult situations. The impatient police officers began to approach Amara. One of them grabbed her arm with unnecessary force, saying that it was better to get out before she gets arrested. She didn't react. His hands were shaking, but his eyes maintained that resilient shine. And it was at that moment, when everything seemed lost, that something completely unexpected happened. Trump, still with his clothes torn and his face dirty, took a step forward. His voice was firm, carrying an authority that he couldn't hide, even in disguise. "Release her now," he said, each word carrying a weight that made the officers hesitate for a brief moment. But hesitation soon gave way to sarcasm. "Look, the beggar thinks he's in charge of something," one of them said, while the other laughed loudly. The tension grew, and the cold of the night seemed to freeze even time. Amara looked at the two men, confused. Who were they anyway? Why were they risking so much for her? Elon, still calm but with a hardened face, approached. "You have no idea what you are doing," he said, his words sounding more like a warning than a request. But the police had no ear for anything other than their own certainties. "Do you think you can intimidate us just because we are on the street?" he asked, without waiting for an answer. The heavy silence was broken only by the sound of Amara breathing heavily. World, trying to stay calm. Right, I trust in God if you believe that divine justice does not fail, even when human justice seems absent. The police officers continued to laugh, but something about Elon and Trump's posture began to bother them. It wasn't just the boldness, it was the way the two men carried themselves as if they were used to commanding, even under rags. "Who do you think you are, huh?" asked one of them, his voice full of disdain. Elon opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, Trump, always impulsive, took a small identification card from his pocket that he had kept hidden. He extended it slowly, as if he were about to reveal a secret that would change everything. The officer took the card with a cynical smile, but as he read the information, his expression began to change. First it was disbelief, then a panic that he tried to hide, but which showed in his wide eyes. This can't be real," he stuttered, looking at his partner. The other officer took the card, and the same shock crossed his face. Suddenly the silence on the street seemed deafening. Amara looked at the two men, not understanding what was happening. "Declare, Amen, I believe, if you trust that the unexpected can bring justice and surprising twists." The police officers looked at each other, now uneasy. One of them tried to hide it, adjusting his tone of voice. "This is a prank, right? There's no way you can be you." But Trump, with a half-smile that contrasted with his weathered appearance, replied, "Look again, you know who we are." By this time, Elon had already taken a small device out of his pocket, pressing a button that revealed a video recording. "All of this is being recorded," he said, his voice cool and controlled. "Every word you said, every act." The officers took a step back, fear now evident on their faces. They were faced with something they couldn't understand. Two of the most powerful men in the world, in disguise, living lives like they never imagined. But what came next would not just be a lesson for them. It would be a shock that would shake everyone present. Right, I have hope if you believe that the truth always finds a way to surface. The tension was growing like a storm about to explode. The police officers stood motionless, fear written all over their faces as they tried to comprehend the scope of what was before them. They weren't just two beggars, nor were they even ordinary people. They were Elon Musk and Donald Trump, two of the most well-known and controversial men in the world, under torn clothes and covered in dirt. The truth came like a blow, but the worst was yet to come, and they knew it. The two men stood their ground. There was no arrogance in their expressions, just an icy determination that seemed to weigh even more heavily on the officer's shoulders. "You know what you did," Elon said, his voice like muffled thunder. "And now the world will know too." He held the recording device tightly, and the officers began to stammer, desperately searching for a way out of the situation. But there was no escape. And Amara? She was static, confusion mixed with fear in her eyes. For years, she was treated like a nobody, someone whose voice would never be heard. Now here, in those absurd circumstances, she was at the center of something much bigger than she could have imagined. But was all this real? Was it even possible that two such powerful men had chosen to step into her shoes, facing the brutality and contempt she knew so well? Right, I believe, if you believe that God puts the right people in our path in the most difficult times. As the silence dragged on, the officer's partner who was holding the card tried to defuse the situation. He stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of false humility. "Look, sir, we didn't mean to offend anyone," he began, but his voice shook, revealing the panic behind his words. "We didn't know who you were," Trump interrupted, his voice thick with sarcasm. "And if you had, would it have made a difference?" The question hung in the air like a sharp blade, cutting through any excuse the officers could come up with. Elon turned to Amara, breaking the moment. He extended his hand to her, a simple gesture but full of meaning. "It's okay now," he said, his voice softer. Amara hesitated, her hands still shaking. She wanted to believe him, but how could she? How could I trust a stranger who had just revealed himself as one of the richest men in the world? Her life experiences taught her to be suspicious, to expect the worst from everyone, especially from those who said they wanted to help. Declare I trust if you believe that even in the darkest moments, light can emerge unexpectedly. At that moment, a discreet black car stopped on the side of the sidewalk. From Teeth Row, a man in a dark suit walked out quickly with a worried expression. He approached Elon and Trump, handing them what appeared to be a briefcase. The officers, still in shock, backed up a little further, clearly realizing they had crossed a line they could never undo. The man whispered something into Elon's ear, who just nodded before turning his attention back to the officers. You need to understand, Elon began, that how you treat others defines who you are more than who they are. His words were like knives, sharp and precise, hitting the target without mercy. You looked at us and saw trash. We saw it in your eyes. But now see what? Power, influence. You are afraid because you discovered who we are. But what about her? He pointed to Amara, who was now watching them with teary eyes. She doesn't have a famous name. There's no camera recording her every step. Does that mean she deserves less respect? Right, I have hope if you believe that no one should be judged by their appearance, but by their heart. The heavy silence was interrupted by movement on the sidewalk. Other homeless people began to approach, attracted by the unusual scene. Many of them knew Amara and were now curious to understand what was happening. For them, the police have always been synonymous with fear, something to be avoided. But seeing two men confronting the police like that was something completely new. Elon looked at the small crowd that was forming. There was something there that he couldn't ignore, the look of hope mixed with skepticism. They wanted to believe that it could be different, but life had taught them otherwise. Trump, on the other hand, seemed less concerned about the public and more focused on police officers. He took a step forward, facing the man holding the ID card. You have a choice now, he said, his voice deep. You can continue to ignore what is wrong, or you can do something about it. The decision is yours, but remember, choices have consequences. Don't wait. Send this text to someone who needs to hear that there is still hope in the world. The police officers looked at each other again. It was clear that they were on the verge of collapse. They knew that any misstep could be the end of their careers. But there was something deeper at play here, something that not even they could ignore, the naked truth that they had been wrong, and now they were faced with an opportunity for redemption. Elon turned to Amara again, kneeling beside her. You deserve better than this, he said, his voice low but full of conviction. We are not here to be heroes. We are here because we need to understand. We need to learn. But now we need to make sure you are heard. He held her hand as if making a promise, and Amara, for the first time in a long time, allowed herself to believe. A single tear ran down her face as she squeezed Elon's hand. Right, amen, if you believe that all pain can be turned into strength and all injustice can be corrected. The story was still far from over. What happened next would change the lives of everyone there, and yours too, when you know everything. Stay with me. The ending will surprise you in ways you never imagined. The night seemed longer than any other. The police officers, confused and tense, finally dropped the documents and took a step back. They were not prepared for the turn that situation would take. On the one hand, they were sure that their attitudes were exposed. On the other, they still couldn't believe the idea that Elon Musk and Donald Trump, two of the most powerful men in the world, had deliberately put themselves in that position. But there was something bigger at stake, something none of them could predict. Amara was still holding Elon's hand. She didn't understand why someone like him had decided to look at her, a woman society had long chosen to ignore. Deep down, she wanted to believe that this was the beginning of something new, but her mind insisted on remembering all the times she had hope, only to have it crushed by harsh reality. As Trump walked away a little, still staring at the police officers with a dark expression, Elon leaned over to whisper something to Amara. Do you trust me? He asked, looking straight into her eyes. Amara hesitated. How can you trust someone when your entire life has been a succession of abandonment and betrayal? But there was something in that look, something that seemed sincere, something that made her soul scream to say yes. Slowly, she nodded. Right, I trust, if you believe that the unexpected can bring changes that transform lives. And that was when everything really started to happen. The man in the suit, who had brought the recording device, handed Elon a cell phone. Elon made a a quick call, Ida, speaking in a low and direct tone. When he hung up, he smiled slightly, a smile that carried not arrogance, but the certainty that something bigger was about to happen. Trump watched silently, his arms crossed and brow furrowed. He wasn't known for his patience, but at that moment, he seemed to understand the need to wait. The police officers, realizing they were losing control, tried to justify themselves. "Look, we were just following protocol," one of them began, his voice thick with nervousness. But before he could continue, Trump raised his hand to silence him. "Protocol," he repeated, his voice thick with irony. "Is this what you call humiliating someone who is already down? Is this what you call humanity?" The question remained in the air, unanswered. The officers lowered their heads, unable to meet Trump's eyes. Meanwhile, Amara began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: dignity. For the first time in years, someone was speaking for her, fighting for her. But there was still fear in his heart. What if this all ended as usual? What if in the end nothing changed? Right, I have hope if you believe that even in the darkest situations there is a path to light. Minutes later, another black car arrived on the scene. This time, two people came out, a serious-looking woman and a man carrying a camera. They approached quickly, speaking to Elon in low voices. Amara watched everything without understanding, while the police officers became increasingly restless. "Who are these people?" one of them asked, trying to remain calm. Elon looked at him and replied simply, "They are here to make sure the world knows what happened tonight." The panic on the police officers' faces was evident. One of them tried to move away, but Trump, with a quick movement, blocked his path. "We're not done here," he said, his voice firm as steel. The police were trapped. Everything they had done, every cruel word, every disrespectful gesture was about to be exposed, and this time there would be no escape. "Don't wait. Send this story to someone who needs to understand that the truth always comes out." But this story wasn't just about the cops. It was about Amara, about all the Amaras who live in the shadows, invisible to a society that prefers to ignore them. Elon knew this, which is why he made the decision to act. He stood up, helping Amara to her feet, and then turned to the camera. "This woman," he began, "is an example of the strength that many of us ignore. She has survived things most people could never imagine. But that's not enough. Surviving is not living, and that's why we're here." Elon's words echoed in the night, reaching not only the police officers, but everyone around them. The crowd, which had previously watched in silence, began to approach. People wanted to hear more. They wanted to understand what was happening. Amara looked at Elon, surprised. No one had ever talked about her like that. She didn't know what to say, so she just squeezed his hand tightly. "Write amen if you believe that God uses unexpected people to bring justice and hope." The man with the camera began recording, capturing every detail of the moment. The police, now completely defeated, had nothing to do but watch. They knew they were about to face consequences they never imagined. But Elon and Trump's focus was no longer on them. It was in Amara and how her story could inspire real change. And then, as if fate were conspiring to make that moment even more memorable, something extraordinary happened. The crowd around them began to grow, made up of those who knew the weight of daily contempt, the cold of the sidewalk, and the indifference of those rushing by. Every face was an untold story of pain. Every look bore the marks of invisible battles. Amara was one of them, but now, for the first time, her story was at the center of everything. It was a moment that many waited for, but never imagined seeing. And then something unexpected happened. One of the people in the crowd screamed, "We are all like her!" The sentence passed through the air like lightning, igniting something in the hearts of the people around. One by one, they began to approach, telling their own stories. A woman with tired eyes spoke about how she lost everything after her husband passed away. A man with a grey beard has told how he was made redundant after 30 years in the same job. Each word was a blow to the silence, a truth that no one could ignore. Elon and Trump watched, their expressions serious but full of determination. "This is what the world needs to see," Elon muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He knew this moment wasn't just about Amara. It was about everyone who was thrown to the margins, about everyone who they felt invisible, crushed by a system that never seemed to listen. Right, I believe, if you believe that all pain can be transformed into a testimony of strength. Meanwhile, the officers remained motionless, as if they were trapped in a storm they could not control. The weight of what they had done was beginning to become unbearable, but the worst was yet to come. The man with the camera pointed the lens at them, capturing not only their faces, but also the guilt and discomfort they could not hide. It was impossible to fake it at that moment. Everything was exposed. Trump, who until then had remained silent, stepped forward. He pointed at the police officers, and then at the crowd. "Look around," he said, his voice booming like thunder. "Look at these people. You thought you were just dealing with beggars, but now you realize you were dealing with human beings, men and women who deserve dignity, respect, and compassion." He paused, looking the officers straight in the eye. "You treated them like trash. And why? Because it was easy, because they thought no one would care. Declare, I have hope, if you believe that even in the darkest moments, truth can triumph over injustice." The crowd began to murmur, some people applauding while others cried. The scene was almost unbelievable. Elon took the camera microphone and turned to the people around him. "We are here because we wanted to understand what it is like to live without anything. We wanted to feel, even if just for a moment, what you feel every day. But what we found was much deeper than we expected. We find stories, we found strength, and we found injustice." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "You are not alone, and today the world will know what happened here. You'll know what you're up against. Let's make sure no one else can ignore it. Don't wait. Share this message with someone who needs to know that there are still people fighting for truth and justice." As Elon spoke, Amara began to silently cry. It wasn't sadness. It was something deeper, something she didn't even know still existed within herself. Hope. She looked out into the crowd and saw faces that were once just shadows. Now they were people with stories, with lives, and she was part of it. Suddenly the silence was broken by another sound. Sirens. More police cars were arriving, and with them the feeling that the moment might fall apart. But Elon didn't move. He stood firm, with his arms crossed, facing the new police officers who got out of the cars. Trump did the same, a look of defiance on his face. The crowd retreated a little but did not disperse. They knew something big was about to happen. Write Amen if you believe that God never abandons those who fight for justice. The new officers seemed confused as they assessed the situation. They looked at their now cornered colleagues and then at the crowd. But before they could say anything, Elon approached them. "You have two options," he said, his voice calm but charged with authority. "They can help correct what's happening here, or they can be part of the problem. The choice is yours." The tension in the air was palpable. The crowd watched silently, each person holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. And then, to everyone's surprise, one of the new police officers stepped forward. He took off his cap, looked at the crowd, and then at his colleagues. "That's not right," he said, his voice low but firm. And in that moment, something changed. The newly arrived police officer's statement seemed to have stopped time. He stood there, motionless, with his cap in his hands, while everyone around him watched, waiting for what would come next. The words, "This isn't right," echoed in everyone's minds, as if they carried a weight that no one could ignore. His colleagues, the first police officers, began to look around, visibly uncomfortable. The crowd, which until then had maintained a safe distance, began to come closer, as if the moment invited them to be part of something bigger. Amara, still holding Elon's hand, felt her heart beat faster. It was a mix of fear and hope, emotions she could barely process. All she wanted was to disappear, to return to her comfortable invisibility, but she knew she couldn't. She knew that moment wasn't just about her. It was about all the people who were treated like her, reduced to nothing by a society that chose who deserved to be seen. "Right, I trust in God if you believe that He transforms even the most desperate situations into miracles. The police officer who had spoken took another step forward and looked directly at Amara. I'm sorry, he said, his voice thick with sincerity. The crowd murmured in surprise as all the other officers seemed even more nervous. It was clear that none of them expected that. I don't know what happened here before we arrived, the officer continued, but I know we can't ignore it. We can't pretend this doesn't matter. His words were like a spark in a dry field. The crowd began to react, with people shouting support and others telling their own stories. A woman in the crowd held a makeshift sign that said, "I am invisible too." She raised the sign above her head, and soon other people began to do the same, using pieces of cardboard, tissues, or whatever they had on hand to write words that expressed their pain. Write, "I have hope," if you believe that the truth can transform even the most hardened hearts. Elon and Trump watched everything, their expressions serious, but there was something in their eyes, determination. They knew that this moment was unique, that the world was about to witness something that could not be ignored. Trump stepped forward, standing next to Amara. He raised his hand, asking for silence, and, incredibly, the crowd complied. What he said next was unexpected. "This isn't about me, not even about him," he said, pointing to Elon. "This is about her," he continued, looking at Amara, "and about all of you, about every person who has ever been humiliated, ignored, treated as if they had no value. You are more than that. You all have a voice, and it's time to use it." He turned to the police officers. "You can keep trying to silence these voices, or you can be part of the change. The choice is yours." The tension in the air was almost unbearable. The officers who had humiliated Amara now seemed smaller, as if the weight of what they had done was finally bearing down on them. One of them tried to speak, but no words came out. He lowered his head, unable to face the crowd. "Don't wait. Send this message to someone who needs to hear that their voice matters and that change is possible." Elon approached the police officer who had apologized. "What you said is important," he said, "but words are not enough. We need actions. What are you going to do now?" The question hung in the air while everyone waited for the answer. The officer took a deep breath, clearly struggling with his emotions. Then he turned to his colleagues and said, "Let's make sure this woman gets the help she deserves. Let's start here." His statement was met with applause from the crowd, but Amara was still hesitant. She didn't trust easily, and for good reason. She looked at Elon, who just shook her hand and said, "Trust the process. This is just the beginning." But was it really the beginning? Or would it be just another empty promise? Doubt still weighed on Amara's heart, but something inside her wanted to believe. "Right, I believe, if you believe that real changes begin with small acts of courage." As the night progressed, more people began to arrive. The story had started to spread across social media, thanks to camera footage and the presence of Elon and Trump. Journalists appeared, followed by activists and onlookers. The place, once just another forgotten corner of the city, was now the center of attention. But with that came another type of fear. Would attention be enough to change something? Or would it be just another spectacle that would soon be forgotten? Amara looked at the growing crowd, at the cameras, at the unfamiliar faces that were now watching her. She felt the weight of responsibility, something she never wanted, but now she couldn't avoid. And it was then that she did something that surprised even herself. She let go of Elon's hand, took a step forward and began to speak. "My name is Amara," he said, his voice shaking but firm. "I'm not famous. I have no money, no house. But I have something that no one can take away from me. My story. And today, I want you to listen." And it was at that moment that the true impact began to reveal itself. Amara took a deep breath as the crowd fell silent, every gaze fixed on her. The words came out hesitant at first, but soon gained strength, as if each syllable was carried by the pain and hopes she had held for so long. "I lived most of my life feeling like I didn't matter," he began, his voice echoing in the night. "People walked past me as if I were invisible. Some cursed me, others simply pretended I wasn't there. But tonight, something changed. For the first time, I'm not just a face lost in the crowd. For the first time, I feel like my story matters." Amara looked at the crowd, her eyes filled with tears that she didn't try to hide. "But I'm not the only one. Look around. Look at all these people. Each of them has a story, a pain, a battle that you may never understand. And it's time time we stop ignoring it. It's time to start them to look at each other as human beings. The crowd erupted in applause, but Amara wasn't finished yet. She raised her hand, asking for silence again, and continued, "I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know this. No one here should have to go through this alone. And if today we can be together, if today we can make our voices heard, then maybe, just maybe, something really is changing. Right? I believe, if you believe that true change begins when we unite for justice and dignity." As Amara spoke, Elon and Trump stepped away slightly, letting the moment be hers. They knew that in the end, her voice was the most important. It was Amara's testimony that would touch hearts and light the flame of change in those who watched. When she finished, the crowd began shouting words of support, names of other forgotten people, and stories that finally wanted to be told. The officer who had apologized stepped forward and, visibly emotional, said, "I promise I will do more than just talk. I will take this further. It's not just about tonight. It's about everything that needs to change." The crowd responded with even louder applause. Cameras captured everything, not just the initial humiliation or shocking revelation of Elon Musk and Donald Trump, but also the transformative power of a woman finally having her voice heard. The impact of that moment would echo for much longer than anyone there could predict. Before leaving, Elon looked at Amara and said, "You are not alone. Never will be again." Trump, in his characteristic way, just smiled and added, "You got this. Now keep fighting and never let anyone shut you up again. Don't wait. Share this message with someone who needs to know that all pain can be turned into strength." As the two men walked away, leaving the scene in the hands of those who now had new hope, the camera still captured Amara's face. She was no longer invisible. It was the face of a revolution that began there, on that cold sidewalk, but which had the potential to touch the world. If you believe in the power of truth and empathy to transform lives, like this video, subscribe to the channel and share this story. Your action could be the start of something extraordinary.